The peculiar patterns of Maddie Parker. Maddie Parker's fingers danced across her tablet screen as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through her bedroom window. Outside, the suburban streets of Boulder, Colorado, hummed with the normal sounds of kids playing basketball and dogs barking at passing cars. But in Maddie's world, starfleets were engaging in an epic battle for the survival of civilization. Come on, she muttered, her blue eyes fixed on the holographic display floating above her custom-modify tablet. The device, a birthday gift from her tech-savvy uncle, had been improved with a few extra features that the manufacturers definitely hadn't intended. The most notable was the experimental quantum processing core that her uncle had smuggled out of his lab at the university. The modification allowed her game to project three-dimensional star maps and fleet formations in stunning detail. What neither of them knew was that it also caused the tablet to broadcast its calculations on a frequency that no human device was supposed to use. Maddie adjusted her fleet's formation, creating a spiral pattern that curved around a simulated gas giant. She had discovered that by using the planet's gravitational field in just the right way, she could slingshot her ships into an attack pattern that was both beautiful and devastatingly effective. If I timed this right. She synchronized the movement of three fleet groups, their trajectories weaving together like strands in a braid. The maneuver should have been impossible according to the game's physics engine, but Maddie had found that if she timed the gravity assists just so, she could make her ships dance through space in ways the game's designers had never imagined. Her room was a testament to her obsession with space strategy. Star charts covered the walls, some official NASA prints, others her own hand-drawn creations. A half-finished model of what she imagined an advanced alien warship might look like sat on her desk, its hull a patchwork of salvaged electronics and carefully painted details. Maddie, dinner in 5 minutes. Her mom's voice carried up the stairs. Just one more level. Maddie called back, her focus never leaving the screen. She was close to perfecting a new technique she dubbed the dolphin dive. Inspired by a documentary she'd watched about marine mammals using ocean currents to save energy while swimming. The game, which she had programmed herself using a modified version of an open-source engine, had started as a simple space combat simulator. But over the past year, it had evolved into something far more complex. She had added layers of strategy that went beyond simple combat, resource management, diplomatic relations between species, and most importantly, the physics of space travel itself. What made her game unique was its adherence to real scientific principles. Thanks to her uncle's physics textbooks and hours of online research, she had programmed the game to follow actual laws of orbital mechanics and relativistic effects. The result was a simulation that was as educational as it was entertaining. Unknown to Maddie, at that very moment, her latest innovation, a technique for using overlapping gravity wells to create a sort of spatial slingshot effect, was being picked up by something far above Earth's atmosphere. The quantum signals from her modified processor were emanating at a frequency that happened to match those used by advanced civilizations for their most sensitive military communications. As she finally perfected the dolphin dive maneuver, successfully threading her entire fleet through a series of gravity assists that looked like an elegant dance in space, a silent alert was triggered on a Centaurian monitoring station at the edge of the solar system. "Mom, I did it," Maddie shouted triumphantly, saving her game and bouncing off her bed. She rushed downstairs to dinner, completely unaware that her afternoon's gaming session had just caught the attention of one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Behind her, the tablet continued to emit its quantum signal, broadcasting the impossible made possible through the imagination of a 12-year-old girl who had never been told that some things just couldn't be done. A most peculiar signal. Fleet Admiral Zixtal had served the Centaurian Confederation for over 3 centuries, but nothing in their distinguished career had prepared them for this moment. Standing on the command deck of the flagship Eternal Dawn, their iridescent scales shifting from deep blue to puzzled purple, they studied the holographic display with all 4 eyes. "Run the analysis again," they ordered, their translator converting the melodic Centaurian speech into the ship's standard communication format. "And this time, verify the signal's origin point." Lieutenant Kruval's tentacles danced across the quantum interface. "Already done, Admiral." 3 times. "The signal is definitely coming from the 3rd planet of this unremarkable star system, what the humans call Earth." The lieutenant's scales flickered with confusion. "But sir, that's impossible. They're still using chemical rockets and radio waves." Zixtel moved closer to the display, their long, elegant neck arching to study the tactical patterns they were receiving. The movements were unlike anything they'd seen in their 300 years of service, where Centaurian battle tactics were based on mathematical precision and centuries of tradition. These patterns flowed like water, adapting and shifting in ways that defied convention. "Look here," Zixtel said, using a finger to trace one particularly elegant maneuver. "They're using gravitational fields as a tactical element, not just for acceleration, but as part of the combat formation itself." Their scales shifted to the deep gold of intellectual excitement. "In all my years, I've never seen anyone turn gravity wells into a defensive network like this." The bridge crew gathered around, their own scales shifting through various shades of amazement and disbelief. On the display, a series of small fleet movements demonstrated how ships could use the gravity of celestial bodies to create an interlocking defense grid that was both energy efficient and tactically superior to traditional formations. "But Admiral," Commander Sixray interjected, her scales a skeptical green. "These patterns, they're coming from a gaming device, a child's toy, according to our analysis. Surely we can't take this seriously." Zixtel's secondary hearts skipped a beat as they watched the next sequence unfold. The tactical display showed a maneuver that could only be described as beautiful. A spiral formation that used overlapping gravity fields to create a cascading effect, allowing ships to move through space with almost balletic grace while maintaining perfect strategic position. "Do you know what you're looking at, Commander?" Zixtel asked softly. This game just solved the Trilogy Gambit, a strategic problem that has plagued our fleet for 7 generations. Their scales rippled with a mix of awe and anticipation, and they did it using a technique that our best tactical computers never even considered. The bridge fell silent. The Trilogy Gambit had been a source of shame for the Confederation since the disastrous Battle of 3 Suns, where they lost 3 star systems in a single engagement because their rigid formation protocols couldn't adapt fast enough to a multi-vector attack. "Sir," Lieutenant Kruval's voice was hesitant. "The signal, it's active again. Whoever is creating these patterns is playing right now." Zixtel made a decision that would change the course of 2 civilizations. "Break protocol. I want real-time monitoring of that signal, every pattern, every variation, and get me everything we have on human educational entertainment systems." Their scales shifted to the command gold of a battle decision. "Something extraordinary is happening on that little blue planet, and I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." As the bridge crew scrambled to comply, Zixtel continued to watch the dancing patterns of light that represented fleet movements no one in the Confederation had ever imagined possible. Somewhere down there, someone was rewriting the rules of space combat as if they were choreographing a dance, and they were doing it for fun. "Most peculiar indeed," Zixtel whispered, their scales shimmering with the gold-white pattern that, in Centaurian culture, represented the moment just before a great discovery. Breaking protocol. The Eternal Dawn's stealth probes descended through Earth's atmosphere like invisible raindrops, their advanced cloaking technology making them undetectable to human instruments. Admiral Zixtal had deployed them against every protocol in the First Contact Handbook, but the tactical patterns emerging from this backwater planet had grown too intriguing to ignore. Triangulation complete, Admiral. Lieutenant Crivel reported, their scales shifting to the deep purple of focused concentration. The signal origin is a residential structure in a region called Colorado. We've isolated the exact room. The holographic display zoomed in on a second-floor window where a young human sat cross-legged on her bed, completely absorbed in what the Centaurians now knew was a self-programmed combat simulator. The scene was so mundane, so innocent, that several bridge officers' scales flickered with disbelief. This is our tactical genius. Commander Sixer's scales rippled with skeptical green. A human child. Admiral Zixtal raised a hand for silence as new data streamed in. The probes were capturing everything. The complex calculations flying across Maddie's screen, the quantum signatures from her modified processor, and most importantly, the innovative battle formations she was creating with casual ease. Look at this latest sequence, Zixtal commanded, their scales shifting to the gold of discovery. The holographic display showed a new formation Maddie had just implemented, a spiral pattern that used nested gravity wells to create what she had labeled in her notes as a space whirlpool. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as the formation executed a maneuver that their own tactical computers had deemed impossible. Ships moved through space like schools of fish, using each other's gravitational wakes to amplify their movement while conserving energy. She's not just playing, Zixtal observed, their secondary hearts racing with excitement. She's innovating. Every session introduces new concepts that our fleet architects haven't considered in 10,000 years of space combat. A junior officer's scales flashed alarm purple. Admiral, she's implementing a new protocol. It's a solution to the Helix Defense Formation. The Helix Defense had been the Confederation's standard formation for defending space stations for centuries. Its one weakness, a vulnerability to multi-vector attacks from specific angles, had been considered an acceptable flaw since no one had ever found a way to maintain both coverage and mobility. Until now. On the screen, Maddie was humming to herself, probably some Earth music, as she casually reorganized the basic principles of space combat. Her new formation looked like a dancing double helix, with ships weaving through each other's paths in a pattern that maintained perfect coverage, while actually using less energy than the standard formation. How is she doing this? Commander Sixer asked, their scales now showing the deep blue of genuine wonder. She has no military training, no access to advanced tactical data, and no experience in real space combat. That, Admiral Zixtal said softly, their scales shimmering with the gold white of profound realization, is exactly why she can do it. She never learned what's supposed to be impossible. The Admiral watched as Maddie saved her game and started working on something new, her face lighting up with what humans called a smile, as she discovered yet another novel approach to fleet dynamics. Sir, Lieutenant Crivel interrupted, their scales shifting to urgent red. Long-range sensors are detecting something at the edge of this system. The patterns match. The Drachnid swarm, Zixtal finished, their scales darkening to the deep blue of serious contemplation. They watched as Maddie continued her innocent game, unaware that her innovations might soon be tested against one of the most dangerous forces in the galaxy. Maintain observation, the Admiral ordered, their scales setting into the steel blue of resolution, and prepare a first contact protocol. If the Drachnids are really coming, we may need this child's impossible ideas sooner than anyone expected. Impossible things. The quantum display on the Eternal Dawn's bridge showed something that made even the most seasoned Centaurian officers question their sanity. Admiral Zixtal had called an emergency meeting of the fleet's top tacticians, and now 20 of the Confederation's finest minds watched in stunned silence as Maddie Parker casually revolutionized space combat theory while eating a peanut butter sandwich. "She calls it gravity dancing," Lieutenant Crivel explained, their scales flickering between amazement gold and confusion purple. "The basic principle is that instead of fighting against gravitational forces, the ships move with them, creating a sort of gravitational symphony." On the display, Maddie's fleet formations moved in ways that defied traditional physics. Ships wove through complex gravity wells like leaves caught in multiple whirlpools, each movement building upon the last to create an ever-expanding web of tactical advantages. "Impossible," Grand Tactician Vex Thor declared, their scales a dismissive green. The energy requirements alone would be reduced by 67%. Admiral Zixtal interrupted, their scales shimmering with excitement gold. "She's not fighting the gravity wells. She's using them to power the entire formation. Each ship's movement adds energy to the system instead of depleting it." The room erupted in argument, scales flashing a rainbow of emotional colors. Maddie, oblivious to the interstellar debate she'd sparked, continued fine-tuning her latest innovation. She'd added a subroutine that allowed ships to use solar winds as additional propulsion, something she'd thought of while watching seagulls soaring on beach thermals during her family's last vacation. "Admiral," Commander Sixra called out, their scales suddenly flashing alarm red. "The Drachnid scout vessels have crossed the Kuiper Belt. Their main fleet can't be far behind." Zixtal's scales shifted to decision gold. "Show me the latest tactical analysis." A new hologram appeared, showing the projected path of the Drachnid swarm. Their formation was classic overwhelming force, a massive arrow of bioengineered warships that had crushed dozens of civilizations through sheer numbers and computational superiority. "Standard containment strategies give us a 12% chance of success," Crivel reported grimly. "Even with our full fleet deployed, the best we can hope for is to slow them down." But Admiral Zixtal wasn't listening. Their attention had returned to Maddie's display, where she was currently testing a new formation she created while thinking about how honeycombs are constructed. The pattern used overlapping fields of influence to create a self-reinforcing defense grid that actually grew stronger under pressure. "Run a simulation," Zixtal ordered suddenly. "Take the girl's honeycomb defense and apply it to our current fleet position." The tactical computers hummed. On the main display, two patterns merged: the Drachnid assault formation and Maddie's latest innovation. The result made every scale in the room flash white with shock. "Projected success rate, 89%, the computer announced tonelessly. "It's not just the formations," Zixtal said into the stunned silence. "It's the way of thinking. We've spent millennia perfecting our understanding of space combat, but this child, she sees it as a dance, a game, a living thing. She finds solutions we can't because she's never been told they're impossible." The Admiral watched as Maddie saved her latest work and started getting ready for bed, her tablet still running simulations of ships, moving like schools of fish through the cosmic ocean. "We have two choices," Zixtal announced, their scales setting into the steel blue of command. "We can either maintain protocol and watch as the Drachnids overrun this system, or we can admit that perhaps the greatest tactical mind in the galaxy is a 12-year-old human who redesigned space combat because she thought it would be cool." The room was silent as the impact of those words sank in. On the display, Maddie Parker, future savior of Earth and revolutionary of space combat, turned off her light and went to sleep, dreaming of ships dancing among the stars. The coming storm. Maddie Parker was supposed to be doing her math homework. Instead, she was staring at her tablet, with an intensity that would have worried her parents if they weren't currently glued to the emergency news broadcast downstairs. The mysterious objects that had appeared near Jupiter 12 hours ago had every astronomer on Earth in a frenzy, but Maddie was focused on something else entirely. "I've seen this before," she muttered, comparing the grainy telescope images to the battle formations in her game. The shapes of the unknown objects, their spacing, the way they moved in perfect synchronization. It all looked eerily familiar. Her bedroom window was open, letting in the sound of sirens and helicopters from downtown Boulder. The government had declared a state of emergency after the objects changed course and began moving toward Earth. But Maddie barely noticed the chaos outside, her mind racing through hundreds of battle scenarios she created over the past year. "Come on, where is it?" She scrolled through her game's save files, looking for a specific simulation she created last summer. The high formation. Where did I put it? Downstairs, she could hear her parents arguing about whether they should head to her uncle's cabin in the mountains. The TV anchor's voice drifted up. Military forces worldwide are on high alert as the objects continue their approach. NASA officials have confirmed that the formation's size and speed suggest advanced technology far beyond. Found it. Maddie's eyes lit up as she opened the old save file. 3 months ago, she'd created a scenario where an overwhelming force used a specific attack pattern, what she'd call the Angry Hornets formation. She'd spent weeks figuring out how to counter it, eventually creating a defense that used the attacker's own momentum against them. The real objects near Jupiter were using almost the exact same formation. Her tablet screen suddenly flickered, the display glitching in a way she'd never seen before. For a split second, she thought she saw strange symbols dancing across the screen, similar to her game's interface, but somehow more alive. Above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral Zixtal watched the Drachnid swarms approach with growing concern. Their scales had settled into the deep blue of strategic focus as they studied the enemy formation. "They're using the thorax configuration," Commander Sixra observed, their scales shifting to worry gray. "Classic overwhelming force tactics." "Yes," Zixtal agreed, "but look at the subtle variations. They've adapted since their last campaign. The formation is more fluid, more like the human child's designs," Lieutenant Crivel finished, their scales pulsing with realization purple. The Admiral's secondary hearts skipped a beat. They've been watching her too, studying the signal just like we have. Their scales rippled with urgent gold, but they don't have the full picture. They've only copied the basic patterns without understanding the underlying principles. Back on Earth, Maddie was deep in concentration, running simulation after simulation. She'd modified her original counter-strategy, incorporating new ideas she'd had while watching a documentary about how schools of fish avoid sharks. The results were promising, but something was still missing. "If I could just..." she began, then stopped as her screen glitched again. This time, the strange symbols stayed longer, almost forming recognizable patterns. They reminded her of the code she used to program her game, but far more complex. In orbit, Admiral Zixtal made a decision that would change history. Initiate Contact Protocol 7. They ordered, their scales setting into command gold. Direct interface, limited bandwidth. It's time to see if this child can do more than just play games. As the Drachnid swarm approached, their biomechanical ships darkening the space between Jupiter and Mars, Maddie Parker's tablet lit up with a message that would transform her from a gaming prodigy into Earth's most unlikely defense strategist. "Greetings, Tactician Parker. Your planet needs your expertise. Would you like to play a game? When reality meets fantasy." Maddie Parker stared at the message floating above her tablet, her heart pounding like a drum. The strange symbols had resolved themselves into perfect English, though they seemed to shimmer and shift as if they were alive. Her first thought was that this must be some kind of elaborate game update. Her second thought was that games don't usually mention planetary defense during actual alien invasions. "Who are you?" she typed, her fingers trembling slightly. The response came instantly, accompanied by a holographic display that made her gaming interface look like Stone Age technology. "I am Fleet Admiral Zixtal of the Centaurian Confederation. We have been studying your tactical innovations with great interest. Tactician Parker." In orbit, Zixtal watched the girl's reaction through the stealth probe's feed. Their scales shifted to cautious gold as they observed her expression. Not fear or disbelief, but rather the same look of intense concentration she showed while solving complex battle scenarios. "The Drachnid formation," Maddie typed, getting straight to the point. "You've seen it too, haven't you? They're using my Hornet strategy, but they're doing it wrong." The Admiral's scales flashed surprise purple. No introductions, no questions about alien life or space travel, just straight to tactical analysis. Perhaps they had chosen correctly after all. "Explain," they commanded, while the bridge crew of the Eternal Dawn watched in fascinated silence. Maddie's fingers flew across her interface, now upgraded with Centaurian technology. "Look, in my game, the Hornet formation only works if you add these micro-adjustments." She demonstrated, her ships moving in a complex dance that made the standard formation look clumsy by comparison. "It's like a ballet. Every ship has to know exactly when to move, or the whole thing falls apart." Commander Sixer's scales shifted to realization gold. She's right. The Drachnids copied the basic pattern but missed the subtle interactions that make it effective. "But that's not the important part," Maddie continued, now fully in her element. "I already figured out how to beat this strategy. Last summer, when I was bored at my sister's soccer practice." She pulled up another simulation, this one showing a defense that looked like a cross between a spider's web and a breaking ocean wave. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, tactical officers watched in amazement as their computers confirmed the effectiveness of Maddie's counter-strategy. It was elegant, unexpected, and nearly perfect, with one fatal flaw. "The energy requirements," Zixtal pointed out gently. "In real space combat, no fleet could generate enough power to maintain that formation." Maddie's response was immediate. "That's because you're thinking about power the wrong way. Here, let me show you something I learned from watching surfers." What followed was a 20-minute crash course in tactical innovation that left the Confederation's best minds reeling. Maddie explained how ships could use solar winds like surfers use ocean waves, how they could build up energy through carefully timed gravity assists, and how the entire formation could become self-sustaining if synchronized properly. "It's not about having more power," she explained, sketching diagrams that automatically converted to advanced tactical displays. "It's about using what's already there. Space is full of energy. You just have to learn to dance with it instead of fighting it." Admiral Zixtal's scales had settled into the deep gold of discovery as they watched this human child revolutionize space combat strategy using concepts she'd learned from Earth's oceans and sports. "Tactician Parker," they said formally, "would you be willing to help us implement these strategies against the actual Drachnid fleet?" Maddie finally looked up from her tablet, her eyes shining with the kind of excitement only a 12-year-old could muster when faced with the chance to turn their greatest game into reality. "Are you kidding? This is going to be awesome. The ultimate game. Just like we practiced," Maddie whispered to herself, her gaming interface now transformed into a full tactical command center through Centaurian technology. Her bedroom had become mission control, star charts, and battle plans hovering in the air around her. Outside, the night sky blazed with the light of two fleets preparing for combat. Admiral Zixtal's voice came through the quantum link, their tones translated into perfect English. "The Drachnid swarm has crossed Mars' orbit. They're forming up for their final approach. A pause. "Are you ready, Tactician Parker?" Maddie took a deep breath, her hand steady on the controls. "Ready. Remember, everyone has to follow the pattern exactly. It's like a dance performance. One wrong move, and the whole thing falls apart." Through her enhanced display, she could see the Centaurian fleet arranging itself according to her design. Hundreds of ships moving in perfect synchronization, using her gravity dancing technique to build up energy for what was coming. The Drachnid swarm emerged from behind Mars, their biomechanical ships moving in the corrupted version of her Hornet formation. They looked like a storm of metal and living tissue, darkening the space between the planets. "They're starting their attack run," Commander Sixra reported, their scales shifting to battle-ready gold. "Just as you predicted, Tactician Parker." Maddie nodded, her game-trained eyes catching every detail of their formation. "They still don't understand how it's supposed to work. Watch their leftward drift. They're fighting the solar winds instead of using them." She made a few quick adjustments to her display, and the Centaurian fleet responded instantly. Ships began moving in her signature pattern, the one she created while thinking about ocean waves and dancing dolphins. "Now," she commanded, her voice steady despite the stakes, "initiate the temporal whirlpool." The Centaurian fleet began to move in a complex spiral pattern, each ship's gravity wake adding to the next, building a massive gravitational dance that pulled at the very fabric of space. The Drachnids, committed to their attack run, found themselves caught in a web of forces they hadn't anticipated. "They're trying to break formation," Crivel reported, their scales flickering with excitement. "Their synchronization is falling apart." Maddie's fingers flew across her interface, making split-second adjustments. "That's because they don't know the second part of the dance. Admiral, execute Maneuver 3. The Centaurian ships responded like a well-rehearsed ballet company, each vessel moving through the complex gravity fields as if they were swimming through cosmic currents. The effect was beautiful and devastating. The Drachnid swarm's formation began to break apart as their ships were caught in overlapping gravitational eddies. "It's working." Sixra's voice carried the shimmer of victory gold. "Their combat effectiveness is down by 60%. But Maddie was already moving to the next phase. "Quick, while they're disrupted. The honeycomb defense, just like we practiced." The Centaurian fleet seamlessly transitioned into a new formation, one based on the structure of beehives and the way fish schools avoid predators. Each ship supported the others, creating a living, breathing defense grid that turned the Drachnid's own energy against them. In the space above Earth, the battle looked like an elaborate dance performance. The Drachnid swarm, their formation shattered, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn by tactics they couldn't comprehend. Tactics born in the imagination of a 12-year-old girl who saw space combat as a game of pattern and flow rather than force and power. "They're retreating," Crivel announced, their scales blazing victory gold. "The swarm is breaking up." Through her display, Maddie watched as the massive Drachnid fleet turned away from Earth, their perfect formation now in shambles. Her strategies, born from watching nature and playing games, had just saved her planet. Admiral Zixtel's voice came through one final time, their tone carrying the respect of a master tactician. "Congratulations, Tactician Parker. You just revolutionized space combat." Maddie smiled, already thinking about new strategies she could try. "That was fun," she said simply. "Want to see what else I've been working on?" Legacy of Play. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, Maddie Parker stood in the Great Hall of the Centaurian Fleet Academy, her school backpack slung over one shoulder and her modified tablet tucked under her arm. The massive chamber was filled with the galaxy's finest military minds, their scales shifting through a rainbow of colors as they watched this young human prepare to give her first official lecture on tactical innovation. Remember, Admiral Zixful said, their scales showing encouraging gold. Just explain it like you're teaching someone a new game. Maddie nodded, then stepped up to the quantum projection platform. With a few taps on her tablet, she filled the air above the audience with dancing lights representing spacecraft in various formations. So, here's the thing about space combat, she began, her voice clear and confident. Everyone was so busy trying to make it work like a machine that they forgot to let it flow like nature. I mean, have you ever watched how birds fly together? It's pretty cool. The assembled tacticians, many of whom had initially been skeptical about learning from a human child, found themselves drawn into her enthusiasm. Their scales shifted from doubt green to interest purple as she demonstrated how her gaming strategies translated into real combat applications. Back on Earth, things had changed dramatically. The Parker Initiative, as it had been named, was revolutionizing not just military strategy, but problem-solving across the galaxy. Schools of all species were implementing what they called the Parker Method, approaching complex problems with the unrestricted creativity of a child at play. And this is something I just figured out last week, Maddie continued, her display showing a new formation that made several senior admiral scales flash white with shock. I was watching my mom make soap bubbles while doing the dishes, and I realized that if you apply the same surface tension principles to gravitational fields. In the audience, Commander Sixera leaned over to Admiral Zixtal. I still can't believe our greatest strategic revolution came from a human child playing games. That's exactly why it worked, Zixtal replied, their scales shimmering with pride gold. She never learned to see limits, only possibilities. The changes weren't limited to military applications. The Centaurian Confederation had established the first Intergalactic Youth Advisory Council, recognizing that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from minds unbound by traditional thinking. Maddie, of course, was its first chair, though she still had to do her regular homework between council sessions. Oh, and check this out, Maddie exclaimed, pulling up a new simulation. I've been working with some Centaurian kids on a new game that combines their understanding of quantum mechanics with human sports strategies. We call it Quantum Quidditch. The display showed an impossibly complex, yet somehow elegant game that had ships moving through fourth-dimensional space using principles derived from basketball, soccer, and several alien sports no human had ever heard of before the contact. In the 3 months since the battle, Earth had been fast-tracked into the galactic community. But perhaps more importantly, the galaxy had learned to value something humans had in abundance: the ability to play, to imagine, and to see solutions where others saw only problems. And remember, Maddie concluded her lecture, her eyes bright with excitement. The most important rule in both games and space combat is to have fun while you're learning. Because when you're having fun, that's when the best ideas happen. As the hall erupted in applause, their scales a unanimous victory gold, Admiral Zixtal reflected on how a single child's game had changed the course of galactic history. The Drachnid swarm had been driven back, yes, but the real victory was in how it had happened, through play, imagination, and the unrestrained creativity of a mind that didn't know what couldn't be done. Later that evening, as Maddie worked on her math homework, some things never changed. Her tablet lit up with a message from the Admiral. Ready to test that new strategy you mentioned. The fleet could use a good game. Maddie grinned, already pulling up her latest project. After all, the universe was full of new games to play, new dances to learn, and new ways to turn the impossible into reality. One move at a time.